right, so in the last video we were talking about why the Ottoman Empire was declining in the 18th century, and today we're going to talk about how did the Ottoman Empire attempt to kind of modernize and fix some of the major issues that they were facing. So the first question is, how did the Ottomans' attempts at modernization lead to the downfall of the Sultan? And if you see on this slide, you could see down here, this is a picture of the Ottoman Emperor, Sultan Selim III. So Selim III was an emperor, a sultan in the 19th century, and he wanted to try to make some reforms to the military. Now, if you remember, we had talked in the last video about the Janissary Corps and how originally the Janissary Corps was this like cutting-edge fighting force, and how over time the Janissary Corps has become hereditary, and it's stopped modernizing, and it's kind of in a decline. Now, just to review again, this is the image of the Ottoman Empire, the decline of the Ottoman Empire in the 18th century, and the areas in the darker colors are the areas that they've lost in the 1600s and 1700s. Some other things that they began to lose in about 1820, Egypt. So Egypt was still technically under the control of the Ottoman Empire, but you might remember when we were talking about imperialism in Africa, Muhammad Ali became like the governor of Egypt, and he began to pull Egypt away from the Ottoman Empire in 1820. Technically, Egypt was still part of the Ottoman Empire, but really Muhammad Ali was kind of ruling it on its own. In addition, we're going to see 1821 to 1832, the Greek Wars for Independence. And during the Greek Wars for Independence, Greece obviously is going to get its independence and is also, too, going to break away from the Ottoman Empire. So Selim III wanted to make some reforms to the military, make the military more Western, more modern, and then hopefully be able to withstand some of the breaking away of the territories. The conservatives within the Ottoman Empire resisted this. The Janissaries revolted. They killed this new Western military, and they killed all of the male members of the Sultan's family, except one person. They missed one guy who came back and became Ottoman Sultan. His name was Mahmud II. He was the only remaining member of the Sultan's family. He comes back to power. He has all the Janissaries massacred. And he is going to undertake a period of reform in the Ottoman Empire that lasts from 1839 to 1876, that are referred to as the Tanzimat reforms. Now, Tanzimat literally means reorganization. So he is going to reform the Ottoman Empire and reform Ottoman law based on a more European model influenced by the Enlightenment. So he attempted to create a new constitution, like I said, based on a more European model. And during this time period, this Tanzimat era, which lasted until 1876, we still see the Ottoman Empire is an empire that is starting to decline. A major war, we talked about this in relation, or we're going to talk about this in relation to Russia, is the Crimean War, 1854 to 1856. And in this war, Russia is fighting for power in the Black Sea, but we also see this as an example of the weakness of the Ottoman Empire, because they're really at the mercy of France, of Britain, and of Russia. So the Crimean War is another example of the Ottoman Empire being very weak. So during this time period, Mahmud II, during this Tanzimat era, was trying to, again, reform Ottoman law based on a more European model influenced by the Enlightenment. In the end, this actually got him a lot of enemies because he was undermining Muslim law, because he was trying to make the country more secular. And for that, he really angered a lot of religious conservatives. He also angered a lot of the minority figures. You would think the minorities within the Ottoman Empire would like a reorganization based on more Western models, but because they were the minority, if you took on a more Western style democracy where people got to vote, the minority groups feared that they would be dominated by the majority Muslim powers, and they feared that they would no longer have power because the millet system would be broken up, which we talked about in the last video, and they feared that they basically in the end would wind up losing power. So Mahmud did not really get a lot of support for the reforms that he was attempting to make within the Ottoman Empire. Some other issues that were going on. If you remember in the last video, I showed you images of the Topkapi Palace and how beautiful it was. So another thing that was probably not the best move to make is, in order to reflect this more Western style government that they're trying to create, the Ottoman sultans decided they were going to build themselves a more Western style palace, which is referred to as the Dolmabahce Palace. So this is the palace they built. So they basically abandoned the Topkapi Palace and dropped all this money to rebuild this huge new palace for the sultans that was based more in a Western style. So here you can see some images that I took when I was in Istanbul of the Dolmabahce Palace. It's beautiful, probably a kind of a waste of money. This is the main staircase going into the palace. The palace is decorated with all of these massive crystal chandeliers. This whole staircase is referred to as the crystal staircase. All of the spindles in the stairs are all made out of crystal. You can see a kind of a close-up of this. So the amount of money this whole thing must have cost is out of control. That's a view from underneath of this massive crystal chandelier. That you could see it as well, and you could see kind of the crystal staircase. It's just like all this like money that was being spent on rebuilding this palace. This is the audience room where the Sultan would hear people coming to speak to him. The amount of money he must have spent was, out of control. Here, actually, you could see an image of Mahmud II. So what brings about an end to the Tanzimat era is actually a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat is a violent overthrow. That's a P. It was a violent overthrow of the government led by this man, Abdul Hamid. So Abdul Hamid comes to power in 1876, ending the Tanzimat era. He comes in with the idea to return the power to absolute rule, to return power in the hands of the Muslim powers, and to undo the reforms that were made during the Tanzimat era. He rules until there is a revolt in 1909 that is known as the Young Turks revolt. What the Young Turks wanted to do is they wanted to restore the 1876 constitution, and they wanted to kind of go back on the lines of modernization for the Ottoman Empire. It was founded by exiled Ottoman subjects who were actually living in Paris. And some of the things that they were pushing for, you could see here on this slide. They wanted basic democratic rights like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. But they were very much a Turkish nationalist group, which creates some problems, again, for this heterogeneous empire with all these various different groups, because they wanted to have universal male suffrage, equality before the law, freedom of religion, free public education, a secular state, the emancipation of women. But Turkish was to be the main language in the empire. And this angered, again, a lot of the minority groups within the empire. In particular, the Arabs were not too happy with all of this. Now, what we're also going to do in this slide, which hopefully won't get too confusing for you guys, is that I'm going to go forward a little bit and talk about World War I, even though I know we haven't done our unit on World War I yet, because I want to talk about some of the changes that actually happens in the Ottoman Empire as a result of World War I. So the next question is, how was Turkey facing total extinction after World War I? So if we look at this map, this again is the map of the Ottoman Empire and some of the decline. After World War, so during World War I, the Ottoman Empire is going to fight on the side of Germany and Austria. And as a result of the Ottoman Empire, as a result of World War I, the Ottoman Empire is basically going to be dissolved, and we're going to see the beginnings of a modern state of Turkey. So the Ottomans, like I said, had sided with Germany because they wanted to regain Egypt. Arab nationalists were kind of encouraged by the British and the French to revolt against the Ottomans, because remember, the Young Turks promoted a program of Turkish nationalism. This angered the Arabs. So the British and the French were making promises to the Arabs within the Ottoman Empire, saying, look, if you side with us, if you help us fight against the Ottoman Sultan, we will see that you have your own independent Arab state after the war is over. So that actually didn't wind up happening. Britain and France wound up dividing up the Ottoman lands in the Middle East into mandates. But the Greeks also kind of fought against the Ottomans because they saw this as a way for them to regain some land and kind of recreate the Byzantine Empire. Now, if we look at this map here, everything that's kind of outlined in green, and I'm going to go over it in red, this is the land that's left to Turkey as a result of World War I. So after World War I, that's all that's left of the Ottoman Empire. So a much smaller place, and really just the state today of modern Turkey. So here you can see that's the two armed camps for World War I. You have Britain, France, Russia. The bottom flag here, this is the Russian flag. Here, that's on one side. And then you have Germany, Austria, and Turkey. And then Italy originally is on the Central Power side and goes to the Allied Power side. So the Europeans are going to carve up the Ottoman Empire after World War I. And you can see here everything in green is the land that Great Britain gets. Everything in these brownish colors are the land that France is going to get. Russia's going to get some land. Italy's going to get some land. They're basically, the Arabs are not going to get the land that they promised. They were promised by the British and the French. That's going to create a whole other host of problems that we'll talk about another day. Another thing also that happened during World War I, which is not really spoken about too much, is the Turkish genocide against the Armenians. So now if you just go back to this map here, Armenia, actually we'll go back to the other map. Sorry. Armenia, if you can see here, is this area here. Today it's its own separate country. Armenia, the Armenians for the most part are Orthodox Christians. And in the facing of World War I, the Ottoman Turks did not trust the Armenians. They feared the Armenians because of the shared religious connection were going to aid the Russians. So as a result, the Ottoman government decided to kind of basically clear out Armenia of all the Christians who had been well integrated in society, had, positions of wealth and power, and were in the Ottoman government. And they decided to basically send them on a death march into the desert in Syria to get them away from the Russian border because, again, they feared that they were going to help the Russians in World War I. As a result of this, we have 1.5 million Armenians die in the Armenian Genocide, which is a genocide today that even Turkey will not officially take credit for or blame for. This is one of the problems, especially with Turkey today trying to get into the EU. France won't accept. One of the things that France wants is the Turkish government to acknowledge what they did to the Armenian people, and they won't do that. But if we see here, this is a chart of the districts of Armenians in different parts of Turkey in 1914 versus 1922. So we see that prior to World War I, there was 2.1 million Armenians. After World War I, there's 387,000 Armenians. In some areas, you have the numbers very drastically reduced with the amount of Armenians that were living in various different parts of the Ottoman Empire. So that's one of the great tragedies of World War I, and nothing was really done to protect the Armenians, and nothing was really done to punish the Ottomans. And Hitler very famously says at one point before his genocide against the Jews, well, no one remembers the Armenians, so no one will remember the Jews either. So because he saw that no one really did anything, the international community didn't really stand up for the Armenians, that's one of the reasons why Hitler felt he could probably get away with his genocide against the Jews during World War II. So after World War I and Turkey becomes Turkey instead of the Ottoman Empire, this man here, who started out as a Young Turk, is going to come to power in Turkey. So the question here becomes, how did Ataturk strengthen Turkey? Now, originally his name was not Ataturk. His name originally was Mustafa Kemal. And he is going to take the name Ataturk, which literally means father of the Turks. So Mustafa Kemal was a member of the Young Turks society, and he was also a war commander during World War I. He very famously fought in the Battle of Gallipoli. Gallipoli was a major battle for the Turks. It was a major victory for the Turks. So he was a war hero because of the Battle of Gallipoli. I'll just show you a map real fast again to show you where Gallipoli is. So Gallipoli is in this area here because basically the allies, the British and the French, wanted to gain control of this land because if they could gain their access into the Black Sea, they could resupply Russia, which was their major ally, but Russia was kind of cut off because the Germans are here and Austria is here, so the French troops couldn't, and the British troops couldn't resupply Russia. So they wanted to gain control of Gallipoli so they could get entrance into the Black Sea. The Allied forces sent mostly a force of Australians and New Zealanders. They were massacred by the Turks because the Turks were in a position of height up on the hillside. It was just easy for them to kind of shoot down as the Australian and New Zealand troops were trying to march and gain the land. And so Ataturk was a war hero because of this major battle in Gallipoli. So he was kind of a well-known, popular figure within Turkey. So he basically also, because after World War I, there's a war between Turks and the Greeks over land, and he also was a war hero from that battle as well. So then, after World War I is over, he is going to become the first president of a modern Turkish state. And he is going to institute a whole host of reforms and turn Turkey into a more modern, secular state. So some of the reforms, his party was the Republican People's Party. And so their goal was republicanism, to create a national assembly, a more modern Western-style system of government, to encourage nationalism, so a Turkification of the government, so Turkish being the language, and very much support for a Turkish national state, populism for the benefit of the people, a state-controlled economy, a secular country free from religious control. So in 1924, he's going to abolish the caliphate, because if you remember, the caliph is the leader of Islam, and typically the Ottoman Sultan was also considered to be the caliph. So in 1923, Turkey is declared a republic, and an appearance of a democratic government is set up. I say appearance because he was, his party was the only political party. We're going to do some readings in class about that. But Turkish nationalism was emphasized, industry was encouraged, agriculture was modernized, and he basically broke the power of the Islamic religion and turned Turkey into a secular state. So he is going to abolish the Sharia. The Sharia is religious law, and that was the law of the lands in the Ottoman Empire because it was a Muslim state. So he's going to abolish the Sharia. Religious freedom is going to be granted. And like I say, he's going to make a lot of reforms to the country. Today, Turkey is the only Muslim country that is a secular country. So it is followed by secular laws, not the Sharia. So here you can see this is an image of Ataturk. He was a very popular figure. Like I said, he promoted industry. One of the major changes he made was also to the Turkish writing system. The Turkish writing system, Turkish language would have been written using the Arabic language, Arabic alphabet, and he felt that it was better if Turkey was more modernized. So he actually changed the alphabet to the Roman alphabet. So literally what that means is that pretty much the whole country became illiterate overnight because they're not using the Arabic alphabet anymore. They're using the Roman alphabet. So everyone had to learn how to read again with this new alphabet. So he promoted education, and popular education was emphasized. Aristocratic titles were ended. People began to take last names, because back then in Turkey you didn't have a last name. So he became Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. That was the last name he took, which was father of the Turks. I'll give you an example also. If you remember Mr. Altanel, that used to be our course teacher here at Floral Park before Mrs. Koch came in. Mr. Altanel's family is from Turkey. His last name, Altanel, in Turkish means hand of gold. And his family is actually his father and his brothers, his father and his brother are jewelers, and they own a jewelry store. And so that's why when they took a last name, they took a last name Hand of Gold, because they came from a long line of jewelers. So everyone took last names. They outlawed things like the fez. So the fez was the hat that most Ottoman men wore. It was a brimless hat. It made it easy to pray without having to take off your hat. And so the fez was outlawed. Women were given emancipation. So women were forbidden to wear the veil in 1934. So Muslim women were not allowed to wear the veil in Turkey. And they were granted equal rights. This today is still kind of an issue in Turkey. Because if you were going to go to a state-run school, even if you are Muslim, and even though 97% of the country is Muslim today, Muslim women are not allowed to wear a veil in public places like schools. So they if a woman is a religious Muslim who believes in wearing the veil, she would wear her veil until she gets into her school building and then take the veil off in school because she's not allowed to wear it in school, and then put it back on when she leaves. So that's a little bit of a tension point in some parts of Turkey today. But he modernized the economy, he established industry, and he set up a 5-year plan for industry to try to push Turkey towards industry. So here you see an image of Ataturk kind of encouraging education. Here you can see some of the major reforms that he made. So he wanted to Turkify the Islamic faith. So the Quran was translated into Turkish. He supported secular education. He abolished the Ministry of Religious Affairs because it's a secular government. There's not going to be a connection. He closed the Sharia courts. He forbid the use of the fez, like I said, Western-style business suits, and he attacked the veiling of women. Like in regards to the language reforms, the Roman alphabet replaced the Arabic. So everyone had to learn how to write in this new language. And he set up state socialism, where the state banks were established to finance the government and state-controlled businesses. He also promoted very much a very strong nationalism. Like, I've been to many countries all over the world. I have never seen as many flags of a country in one place as I have in Turkey. The Turkish flag is everywhere and in abundance. This is actually the room in which Ataturk died. It's in the Dolmabahce Palace. And the bed is, of course, draped with the Turkish flag. Like I said, everywhere you go in Turkey, I flew into Ataturk Airport. I would drive down Ataturk Street. His picture is everywhere. It is against the law in Turkey to insult the flag or to insult Ataturk. And a funny story, I was in Turkey. I was haggling with a man to buy something, and after we had agreed on the price, and I should have had this conversation with him before I had to pay for the price for what I was buying, because he was asking me, "Oh, what do you do in America?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a teacher." "Oh, what do you teach?" "I teach history." "Oh, do you teach about Turkey or the?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I teach about Turkey. Oh, and I teach about Ataturk." And he went, "Really? You teach about Ataturk in America? You teach about Ataturk in America?" And he's like going crazy, and he's telling me, like, "Oh my God, she's from America, and they teach about Ataturk there." And he was like going crazy. He was like so excited that Americans learn about Ataturk. So he's a very popular figure today in Turkey. He refused to marry because he didn't want to create a dynasty. So he didn't want to have any children. So he didn't want someone to he didn't want his children to think that they were the heir to his power, because he wanted to create a republican government with a president. He, like I said before, made a secular government. So surprisingly enough, even though he was Muslim, he died of cirrhosis of the liver because he was a little bit of a drinker, which is outlawed in Muslim society. But so the last question, if World War I did not occur, would Turkey have modernized or westernized? I want you to think about that. But Turkey today is an interesting country because, again, it's the only secular Muslim country. We have strong ties to it. Turkey is a member nation of NATO. They're important in, the fighting going on right now. Turkey also is the gateway into Syria, which is creating issues with ISIS. So there's lots of things to kind of keep in mind. The importance of Turkey today in the Middle East really can't be disclaimed. So on that note, we're stopping here, and I'll see you guys in class.